from Free Speech TV, Just Solutions. Rachel, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that reference to being on a highway to climate hell, that stems from an article that you wrote, and you were essentially quoting UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator." So as we look at what was achieved, or maybe what didn't get done at Cop27, I know that you wrote before the start of the conference that there were three things that you were looking at that would be a metric for success. One was increased ambition in emissions reduction commitments. Secondly, a renewed, scaled up climate finance pledges from richer countries. And number three was meaningful progress on addressing climate loss and damage. Let's dig into all three, and we'll start with the second one, because it does seem that was addressed with this fund that was created. Tell us a little bit about that, the Loss and Damage Fund.
Yeah, so we came into this COP at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt with some really sobering scientific reports that had come out in the weeks before, showing that global carbon emissions continue to rise and hit record levels. And that, frankly, the science is showing that we're getting very close to the risk of blowing past the 1.5-degree goal that we know will have grave and profound consequences for people on the planet. So that was the context in which these negotiations started. And clearly, to address that climate crisis, we need to cut emissions as fast as possible. But to do that globally, there needs to be climate finance for low and middle income countries to also make a clean energy transition alongside richer nations. And frankly, richer nations are failing on both fronts. They're continuing to expand their fossil fuel infrastructure, and they're failing to provide the finance that is needed to make a global clean energy transition for countries to adapt to unavoidable climate impacts. Now at Sharm, we did finally, after 30 years, get agreement on a fund to address loss and damage. And loss and damage refers to that extreme part of climate impacts that are essentially impossible to adapt to through ordinary means. I'm talking about things like loss of land to sea level rise, which basically will forcibly displace millions of people around the world from their homes, from their livelihoods. That kind of a climate impact is already a reality in some places, and it's going to get worse in the decades to come. So this fund for loss and damage, getting this fund established is critical to address this challenge, and to address it in a way that acknowledges the inequity that we see in the world, which is that emissions have come primarily from richer countries, but they're imposing impacts on communities in many countries that have contributed very little to climate driving emissions. And so getting this fund was crucial. It was a litmus test for the success of this COP. That said, the fund is an empty fund for now. It has been created. There's a transitional committee that will help address the details to get it operational within the next year or two. But there isn't yet funding on the scale that will be necessary to actually address the problem.